Hi there, my name is Michael Cousins, and welcome to another Laker Lesson brought to you by GVSU. Laker Lessons are virtual learning experiences that cover key topics in K-12 education. Today's lesson will be led by GVSU School Support Specialist Jeff Maxwell, and in this lesson, Jeff will help you identify, run, and utilize NWEA reports that best inform mid-year student growth and achievement trends. Jeff, thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Michael. Again, if you're watching this video today, you may be a school or district leader or instructional coach or other school administrator who may be asking yourself, we have all this data now, we just finished up with NWEA testing, now what do I do with it? It's my hope that today's session will help you answer that question. So, today we're going to be learning how to identify and run the highest leverage reports that determine mid-year student achievement growth trends at the school and district level, grade level, and classroom level. Additionally, we're going to use specific data for reports to communicate progress to all stakeholders, inform instructional practices, and coach teachers. There's a ton of student data out there, and it can be overwhelming at times. So I want to ground today's session in this core idea that the data itself is not as important as what you do with it. Whenever we collect student achievement data, unless we're doing something with it, the data itself is fairly useless. So the data itself and what the data says isn't as important as what we do with it and how we react to it and how we use it to inform instruction. On this screen now, you can see the highest leverage reports to run at the mid-year point. So we've completed fall testing, we've completed winter testing, and now we want to see how are our students doing at the midway point in the year. This graphic highlights the 7 highest leverage reports that I feel help meet various needs that administrator has at the midway point. We're going to talk about all these individually, but we're going to also talk about them as a group or as groups of reports. We're going to talk about the district summary and student growth summary report together. Then we're going to discuss the grade report and student achievement status and growth report. Lastly, we'll discuss the class report, achievement status and growth summary with quadrant report diagram, and finally the class breakdown by instructional area. And these different reports serve different purposes, and we're going to use to highlight our work as school leaders at different levels. For instance, when we're considering the board level or reporting out on school level or district level progress, the district summary and student growth summary reports are the most valuable reports when considering that really high level perspective of student growth by school or by district. At the school leadership level, we're going to take a look at the grade level reports and achievement status and growth reports for individual classrooms. And then finally, our work at the teacher level will consist of looking at the class report, the achievement status and growth summary with Quadrant Chart, and the class breakdown by instructional area report. So you can see, according to this diagram, we're going to go from very high level to very granular at the teacher level and classroom level. The first report that I do want to reference is the district summary report. This is an incredibly valuable report if and when you want to look at student achievement and student growth over a number of years and potentially even across a number of buildings. This will show you how many students were tested at different times. You can see student mean Writ scores by grade and by subject, and student performance trends in specific instructional areas by subject area test. This is a way that you can highlight mid-year academic progress and growth across grade levels and across schools, and leverage trends in this report by instructional area to inform potential instructional practices, where you may want to focus instruction, where you might want to ramp up, or different instructional approaches. There's a wide amount of data, a plethora of data in this report. It's very data heavy. I'm not going to show it right now, but it is a very valuable report if you want to look at student achievement over time and across buildings. The most helpful report to run at the individual building level is the student growth summary report if you want to get a school level view of how students are doing. This is going to tell you the number of students that were tested, their average Writ scores across a range of testing periods, their achievement percentiles, their average Writ growth that we observed versus the expected growth, their conditional growth percentile, which is a very valuable metric that I will elaborate on, the average Writ growth by grade level, and the percentage of students who met their projected growth targets. This is a really high level, valuable report that very concisely breaks down at a high level how students are achieving and how they're growing. Again, this is a report to determine and inform high level instructional practices and maybe give us some indicator of grade level trends. This is what the report looks like. It begins by showing the total number of students who tested in that period of time. So we can see by grade level the number of students that were tested. Next, we see in red here the mean Writ score by grade level over those comparison periods. So we see their fall Writ scores compared to their winter Writ scores. I'm going to highlight here that the kindergartners in math started at a 145.4 in the beginning of the year when they tested, and as of the winter testing period, scored a 155.6. Those Writ scores correlate with an achievement percentile, so that 145.4 in the fall indicates that students on average are performing around the 86th percentile. That 155.6 in the winter is again at about the 86th percentile of what kindergartners score across the country during that same testing period. The next area that we want to highlight is students' observed growth. How many Writ units did they increase during that testing period compared to what they were projected to grow? So these kindergartners, we'll stick with them. We saw that they increased their Writ scores on average by 10 points. And that was right on target with what we expected this group to score. That doesn't mean that every single student at that grade level met their target, but on average, we expected that group of students to grow by 10 Writ units, and that's essentially what they did. That corresponds here with a school conditional growth percentile. This number is really valuable because it shows how are students at this grade level growing at a rate compared to their national peers. So if students are growing at the conditional growth percentile of 50th, at the 50th percentile, that means their rate of growth is similar to the average rate of growth for students at that grade level across the country. So if students are growing at the 50th percentile or higher, they're exceeding the growth rates of their peers at that grade level. If that conditional growth percentile is under 50%, that means they're not growing as fast or at the same rate as other students at that grade level. I want to highlight here the fourth grade students. We can also look at the first grade students. The fourth graders have a school conditional growth percentile of 9, meaning their rate of growth would be in the bottom 10% of all fourth graders across the country over that testing period compared to what we would expect them to grow. If we go back and look at their growth, those fourth graders grew on average 5 Writ points. We expected them to grow about 6.5, so they're falling short of that expected growth metric. And then finally, we can see here at the end in this light blue, the number of students who met their growth projection compared and the corresponding percentages, meaning 30 kindergartners met their growth target out of the 50 who took the test. That corresponds to 60% of those kindergartners met their growth projections. Finally, this data is summarized on the graph below. We can see on the bar graph portion the number of Writ units that the students grew compared to, in the orange dot, the projected growth that we expected to see at that grade level. So if the bar meets that orange dot, that means those students achieved the level of growth that was expected. If the bar is below, that means the students did not grow what we would expect them to during that time period. So we can see here, kindergartners in 5th grade essentially met their expected growth projections, whereas 1st grade through 4th grade fell short, with 1st being well below what we expected that group to achieve. This student growth summary report is really important to highlight at that board level, but really gives you a good perspective of the school level growth and achievement during that testing period and over that period of time. That's also a very valuable report to highlight at the school leadership level, but we're going to shift focus at the school leadership team now to the grade report. The key data to highlight on this report are grade level Writ scores compared to district and national means, the number of students in that grade that are performing above the grade level Writ, and breaks down student performance by instructional area and highlights individual student performance as well. We can use this report to start talking about high leverage or high level instructional trends. Are we seeing students exceeding in one area of math but not another? And begin to identify students for our school level supports and interventions and inform our MTSS systems. This report is fairly simple. We can see first as we run this report, this is grade level 1, this is grade 1 in math. We can see this, the 1st graders here were scoring a 172.6 in the winter compared to the district that was scoring about a 170 during the same time, and the grade level mean of about a 170. So these 1st graders are doing slightly above the district and what we would see nationally. On the next page, you see a more in-depth breakdown of where students are performing and how they're performing across these various instructional areas. So we can see students broken down by operations and algebraic thinking, measurement and data, geometry, and number and operations. And then the corresponding colors relate to, are they achieving at the number of students achieving in the low percentile range, that low average range, average, high average, and the high achievement percentile ranges. So you can see the number of students and percentage of students at that grade level that are falling into those different ranges. And then use that information to determine, you know, areas of strength and areas where the grade level might want to double down and focus on skills that will move more students into those upper ranges of achievement. The next report to look at is the achievement status and growth report. This report shows not only how students are scoring, but it highlights their Writ growth and their projected versus their observed growth, and identifies students who did or did not meet their projected growth targets. Again, this now on the instructional leadership team level takes that high level, grade level information and breaks it down a little bit more by teacher. So we can see teacher by teacher the number of students in each classroom that met their projected growth targets and those who did not. This again is a report to look at when we start doing some instructional coaching or data meetings with teachers, and helps lead those conversations that might inform decisions around additional supports or MTSS in the classroom. So again, a lot of data in this report. It's a very data-rich report. The first area that I'll highlight here are the Writ scores by student in the fall versus the winter, the corresponding achievement percentiles that relate to those Writ scores. Over here on the growth side of things, we can see the students' projected growth versus observed growth. Then in purple, whether or not they met that growth target. And then finally, a really valuable piece of data is that conditional growth percentile by student. So again, a student who is scoring above, or a student who has a conditional growth percentile above 50% is growing at a rate faster than their peers at that grade level, versus somebody who has a lower conditional growth percentile is not growing at the same rate as their other peers. So again, we might want to look at if they're not meeting their targets and they're not growing at the rate we'd expect them to grow, what do we need to do for that particular student? Lastly, we're going to get a little bit more granular and focus on the individual teacher level. Again, it's super important that instructional coaches are aware of that classroom data, that individual teacher level data, to better inform those data meetings or instructional coaching sessions that might be happening. This class report is going to look very similar to the grade report that we already looked at. It just focuses on that individual teacher's classroom. So this is Miss Delgado's classroom. We could see, and this is math, we can see how her students are scoring. They're scoring a 164 on the math section during this time, compared to the grade level mean Writ, which is a 160. So we can see the students that fall into the different ranges at a very high level, but then we can also see it by instructional area. So we can see in her classroom where students are doing really well. So in looking at this report, I would highlight that it seems like her class has a really strong grasp of number and operations, but we maybe need to do a little bit more work around geometry. And it could be that she just hasn't gotten to geometry yet, and that's coming up later this year, but it could be an area of focus to inform instruction moving forward. This also shows the student roster in her class and their Writ scores in increasing order. So we can see first students who are scoring at lower Writs and listing them in order up to the students who are scoring at higher levels. We can use this report to begin to establish student groups. So you can see here, based on specific Writ scores, I've broken the students down into 4 groups. There was nothing scientific about the way I did this. I just looked at their scores and boxed off students who were scoring in the 140s versus 150s versus 160s and ultimately 170s. So this is one way I can look at this report and begin to break down student groups to meet the individual needs of those students in the classroom and do some small group instruction. That's at the Writ score level, but maybe we can inform different groups by looking at the different instructional areas. So although this student here, Miss Newman here, is scoring a 156, she's really strong in terms of operations and algebraic thinking. So she might be in a higher group when we're dealing with that particular instructional area, but maybe needs some other support in one of the other areas. One thing to highlight on the actual reading class report is the reading class report also provides lexile ranges corresponding to that student's Writ score. So I just did want to highlight those lexile ranges as it relates to this report. We've already covered the achievement status and growth report when we talked about the school leadership level, but I did want to introduce another tool to inform instructional coaching conversations and to inform student grouping. And we're going to look at that in a live demo on the NWEA site. So once you're in the NWEA site, we can simply run this report. We're going to click on Achievement Status and Growth Summary with Quadrant Chart. We're going to click on Winter 2020-2021 because obviously we haven't done winter testing yet this year. We're going to select a school. We're going to select an instructor. And we're going to look at Fall to Winter Growth Summary Report. And click Create Report. Now, this gives us a quadrant chart with various colors, and you're seeing a lot of data points on here that can be overwhelming at first. But what this chart shows us is the student achievement percentile. So how high are they achieving compared to their national peers versus on the y-axis their conditional growth percentile, how fast are they actually growing. So in the green here, we're seeing students who are achieving at a very high level and growing at a rate that is at or above their peers in their grade level. This yellow section is students who are achieving at a high level but aren't growing at a rate as fast as their peers. The orange shows us students who are growing at a really fast rate, at or above their peer level, but aren't achieving at the same percentile. And then finally, this group in red are students who are performing less than the 50th percentile in terms of achievement and are not growing as fast as their peers. So this is a group that we should be identifying for some levels of supports because their achievement levels are lower than their peers and they're not growing fast. So they're at risk of that achievement gap widening. Each of these data points represents an individual student's performance and growth in individual subject areas. So while there might be a lot of data points on here right now, let's just look at math. So I'm going to click off of language arts here. We can see dots disappear. I'm going to click on science, and those data points disappear. So I'm just left with students in math. If I hover over those data points, we can see the individual student names and how they fall into these different categories or groups. Again, this may inform student grouping in the classroom. This may also inform MTSS supports that these students may need or want. But if you click on one of these data points, you can also see that for that individual student, what percentile, what's their achievement percentile, as well as their actual conditional growth percentile. Very valuable report to run to kind of see a visual of student achievement versus how their rate of growth in the classroom. Scrolling down on the report, you can see by individual student, again, their Writ scores, their achievement, and whether or not they met their projected growth targets. And this is an interactive table where you can actually sort by conditional growth percentile, or you can sort by their winter scores. And then you can see over here the quadrant that those individual students fall in. So a very valuable interactive tool that's really helpful for those individual conversations with teachers. So lastly, we're going to highlight here the class breakdown by instructional area report. This is by far the most granular report that we're going to be looking at. This highlights student level Writ scores by instructional area. So we're not only going to be able to see how did that student score overall in a subject, but what areas might they need some more support in, or what areas are they doing really well in. This is most useful from an instructional coaching standpoint and in meeting with teachers to inform small group instruction stations, or maybe even whole class instructional trends. This also helps to inform and support those MTSS decisions and conversations at that individual classroom level. So the report will look like this. We can see, based on these various instructional areas, what students fall into what ranges for those particular instructional areas. So we can see, while this student, Zimmerman, is scoring a 148 overall in math, for operations and algebraic thinking, they fall into this 141 versus 150 Writ range. By contrast, this student with the last name of Pope, while they're scoring a 158 overall in terms of their math Writ score during this time, they're at a 161 to 170 range in terms of operations and algebraic thinking. So we can see different students having strengths or relative weaknesses in the different instructional areas, and this may inform grouping. So one way we might want to consider student groups, if we're considering operations and algebraic thinking, the groups might look something like this. So I'm taking those two groups of students at those lower Writ ranges and making them a group. Then I have two groups of students kind of in the middle. And then I have another group of students who are scoring at the higher end, maybe are in the need of more challenging materials or continuing to develop higher level skills in operations and algebraic thinking. Those groups might look very different though when we consider numbers and operations. So this is how those groups might look. If I focus on these students in the 171 to 180 range, that's a lot of students. So it may be that I break that into another smaller group and take some of those students to work with the students who are scoring at the higher level ranges. But there's nothing scientific about the way I'm grouping students. I'm just looking at students who are in those approximate ranges and using this data to identify students for small group instruction based on their needs at that instructional level. We can then use this class breakdown report by instructional area in conjunction with the learning continuum tool to really look at what are those learning activities and instructional activities that we can do with those small groups who are ready for that particular instructional level at that time. So this is a really valuable tool that's, again, found within the NWEA platform that tells me, once I have these groups of students, what kinds of activities are these students ready for right now? And it's really valuable to inform those instructional activities with different groups of students so we can meet their individual needs. There was a lot of information in this presentation. Now that we have the data, these are some high-level trends of what you can do with it. But if you're in need of any additional support, please don't hesitate to reach out to me at the Charter Schools office, where you can find my contact information on our website at gvsu.edu/CSO.
Jeff, thank you so much. And you're right, there was a lot of information. And it looks like there's also more information to cover, as this was only part 2 of your series on NWEA data for leaders. I believe it's a 3-part series. So once the other modules are complete, what can leaders find in part 1 and part 3?
Excellent. In part 1, we'll be looking at the highest leverage reports to pull in the fall to identify baseline data for students, inform those early interventions that we can do with students right at the beginning of the year once we have some data to work with. And then part 3 will focus on those reports to run at the end of the year to summarize student progress, to inform how students did, and to identify areas where we might want to do some planning for summer PD over areas where we want to continue to grow and to inform continuous improvement efforts.
Okay, so these 3 lessons, they'll be there as support pieces to start off a year, to end a year, and as you look forward to the next year.
Excellent. Yes, absolutely.
Sounds good. Thank you again.
Thank you.
And if you want to see this Laker lesson or more Laker lessons, or participate in other virtual learning opportunities, please visit gvsu.edu/CSO and check out what is offered under the Professional Education tab. We'll see you next time.